My brother didn't just steal my inheritance. He stole my past, my memories, and my last connection to the only person who ever truly saw me. But he made one fatal mistake. He never imagined that 7 years later, I'd become his new neighbor. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you were supposed to trust, someone who was meant to protect you, then you know the unique kind of fire it lights in your soul. It's a cold fire, one that doesn't burn out. It refines you. Stick with me, and I'll tell you how I used that fire to forge the perfect revenge. And if my story resonates with you, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. It helps more than you know. Now, let's go back to the beginning. The day my world fell apart. Part 1. The Inheritance of Ashes. Grandma Eleanor's apartment wasn't a property. It was a sanctuary. It was a time capsule that smelled perpetually of cinnamon, dried lavender, and the sweet, phantom scent of the apple jam. She was always jarring. The floors whispered stories with every creak, and the light that filtered through the old, wavy glass of the bay window seemed softer, kinder, than anywhere else in the world. It was the only place I ever truly felt safe. She passed away in late autumn, the way she'd always wanted to, peacefully in her sleep, with a half-finished crossword on her nightstand. The grief was a physical weight, a crushing blanket that smothered all sound and color. She hadn't been just my grandmother. She had been my anchor, my confidant, my parent when my own were too lost in their own squabbles to notice their children. Especially their quiet, unassuming daughter, Olivia. My brother, Oleg, was 5 years my senior, and from the moment he was born, he seemed to suck all the oxygen out of every room. He was loud, charismatic in a superficial way, and possessed an unshakable conviction that the world owed him everything. He was the eldest son, a title he wore like a crown, and in his eyes, that made him the rightful heir to everything of value, tangible or not. I was the one who sat with Grandma through the long, quiet afternoons when her memory started to fray around the edges. I was the one who learned to make her tea just the way she liked it, 2 lumps of sugar, a whisper of milk, and held her frail, paper-thin hand when the nights grew long and she grew frightened. Oleg would visit on holidays, a whirlwind of loud greetings and performative affection, always ending his visit with a thinly veiled inquiry about her finances or a joke about how he'd take care of the old place when she was gone. Grandma saw right through it. A week before she passed, her voice was a fragile thread of sound, but her eyes were as clear as ever. She pulled me close, her hand trembling in mine. "The apartment is for you, Olivia," she whispered, her breath smelling of chamomile tea. "Because you were the only one who stayed. The only one who loved me for me, not for what I had. Don't let him take this from you. It's your home." The day the will was read was a study in gray. The lawyer's office was stuffy, smelling of old paper and stale coffee. I sat on a stiff leather chair, my hands clenched in my lap. Oleg sat beside me, his leg jiggling with impatient energy. His wife, Svetlana, was with him, a woman whose face seemed permanently arranged in a look of mild disappointment, her eyes constantly scanning for the next best thing. When the lawyer, Mr. Abernathy, read the clause, "To my granddaughter, Olivia Jensen, I bequeath my residential apartment located at 142 Chestnut Avenue, its contents and all associated effects," the silence that followed was deafening. I felt a dizzying wave of love and gratitude for my grandmother. She had kept her promise. She had protected me. Then I risked a glance at Oleg. The mask of the charming, bereaved grandson had vanished. His jaw was a block of granite, a muscle twitching violently beneath his skin. His eyes, usually dancing with facile charm, were now cold, hard chips of ice. Svetlana shot him a look that was pure venom before smoothing her expression into one of martyred sympathy for me. But it was Oleg's reaction that scared me. He turned to me, and the smile he forced onto his face was a grotesque caricature. It didn't reach his eyes. It was the smile of a predator. "Well, Liv," he said, his voice a low growl barely disguised as a congratulatory murmur. "Looks like Grandma really appreciated you." The weeks that followed were a blur of paperwork and sorrow. I started the slow, heartbreaking process of sorting through Grandma's life, each object a memory. Her reading glasses, still resting on a worn copy of Pride and Prejudice. The collection of mismatched teacups she'd gathered from flea markets. The air in the apartment was thick with her presence, and while it was painful, it was also a profound comfort. This was my home, my legacy. A month after the funeral, Oleg called. His voice was thick with a syrupy sweetness that immediately set my teeth on edge. It was the voice he used when he wanted something. "Livy, my little sister," he began. "How are you holding up? I've been so worried about you, all alone in that big place. Let me take you out for coffee. We need to talk." We met at a sterile, trendy cafe downtown, the kind of place Oleg loved and I despised. The air buzzed with hollow chatter and the hiss of an espresso machine. He and Svetlana were already there, settled into a booth, looking for all the world like a concerned, benevolent royal couple granting an audience to a peasant. Oleg wrapped his hands around his latte, his expensive watch glinting under the track lighting. "Olivia," he said, his voice a low, conspiratorial hum. "We need to be practical. You know you can't handle the apartment. You're young, you're single. The utilities alone will be a burden. And what about repairs? The boiler is ancient. The roof will need work eventually. It's a money pit for someone just starting out." I started to speak, to tell him I had a plan, that I had a good job as a junior graphic designer, and I'd figured out a budget. But he held up a hand, silencing me. "Now he continued, puffing his chest out slightly. "I have a family. Svetlana and I are thinking about the future. We can manage the property. It makes more sense. It's an asset that needs to be properly leveraged." Svetlana nodded eagerly. "We were thinking, for the good of the family," she chimed in, her voice smooth as silk, "that it would be best if the deed were in Oleg's name. For tax purposes, you understand. It's just cleaner that way." My stomach churned. "But Grandma left it to me. And we respect that," Oleg said, leaning forward, his eyes boring into mine. "Of course we do. This is just a formality. A temporary solution. Look, here's the deal. I've spoken to a financial advisor. I'll put the apartment under my name, and I'll give you generous compensation. $20,000. Cash. Enough for you to get a great start. Maybe a down payment on a little condo of your own someday, somewhere more modern. 20,000. For an apartment worth at least 10 times that." I knew it was a pittance, but the way he said it, with such authority, made me feel small and naive. I don't know, Oleg." He sighed, a dramatic, put-upon sound. "Olivia, I'm trying to help you. I'm your big brother. Who else is going to look out for you? You'll always be welcome to stay with us if you ever need anything. Your family. We take care of our own." He reached across the table and placed his hand over mine. His touch was cold. "Just trust me. It's the smart move." I looked at him, at his earnest, pleading face. For a split second, the big brother I remembered from childhood flickered into existence, the one who taught me to ride a bike, who scared away the monsters under my bed. I was grieving, exhausted, and deeply, deeply lonely. I craved family. I craved the sense of being taken care of. Against every screaming instinct in my gut, against the echo of my grandmother's warning, I allowed myself to believe him. He had the paperwork ready. Of course he did. He pulled a folder from his briefcase and slid a document and a pen across the table. "It's a simple transfer of title. We can get it notarized just down the street." I hesitated, my hand hovering over the pen. The air felt thick, hard to breathe. "Don't let him take this from you." Grandma's voice was a ghost in my ear. "Come on, Liv," Oleg urged, his voice hardening slightly. "Don't make this difficult." And just like that, I folded. I had spent my entire life trying not to be difficult, not to make waves. I signed. The scratch of the pen on the paper sounded like a death sentence. The compensation never came. The first week, he said the bank transfer was processing. The second week, he said there was an issue with his business accounts that needed sorting out. The third week, he stopped answering my calls. I went to the apartment. My key no longer worked. I knocked, and after a long moment, Svetlana opened the door, a chain still latched. She looked me up and down, her expression one of mild annoyance. "Can I help you?" she asked, as if I were a stranger selling magazines. "Svetlana, it's me. My key isn't working. I need to get the last of my things. And I need to talk to Oleg about the money." She sighed, a put-upon puff of air. "Oleg is very busy. And frankly, Olivia, we've decided the compensation idea isn't feasible right now. His business needs the capital. You should have thought of that before you signed." The floor dropped out from under me.
What?
But he promised. He said it was a temporary solution. Svetlana laughed, a short, sharp, ugly sound. "Oh, you sweet, naive girl. You signed the papers. It's our apartment now. This is for the best. You'll see." And then she closed the door. Not a slam, but a slow, deliberate click. The sound of a lock turning, of a life being stolen. I stood there in the hallway that smelled of my grandmother's potpourri, staring at the polished wood of the door, and the full, crushing weight of my stupidity and his betrayal crashed down on me. I had given him my home, my sanctuary, my last piece of Grandma Eleanor, and in return, he had given me nothing but a locked door and the cold, hard reality of the street. I was homeless, penniless, and utterly, devastatingly alone. Staring up at the window where Grandma used to wave, I felt the grief curdle into something else. Something dark and cold and patient. It was the first, tiny seed of a rage that would take 7 years to bloom. Part 2. The 7-year winter. The first year was a blur of survival. The shock of Oleg's betrayal left me emotionally paralyzed, but necessity is a brutal motivator. I scraped together the last of my savings and found a room for rent in the grimiest part of the city. It was a shoebox on the 4th floor of a walk-up, with a single window that overlooked a brick wall, and a bathroom down the hall that I had to share with 3 other tenants. The air was perpetually damp and smelled of mold and stale cigarette smoke. At night, I'd lie on the lumpy mattress, listening to the couple next door screaming at each other through the paper-thin walls, and I would cry. I cried for my grandmother, for my lost home, but most of all, I cried for the fool I had been. Trusting Oleg was a mistake of such catastrophic proportions that it felt like a brand on my soul. Every creak of the floorboards in my dingy room reminded me of the gentle, familiar groans of Grandma's apartment. Every whiff of mildew reminded me of the scent of her apple jam. I was haunted by the ghost of a life that should have been mine. My job as a junior designer paid just enough to keep me from starving, but not enough to dream of anything better. So I took a second job, waitressing at a greasy spoon diner from 6 in the evening until 2 in the morning. The work was grueling. I'd come home reeking of fried onions and despair, my feet swollen, and my back screaming in protest. After a few months, I added a third job, cleaning offices on weekends. My life became a relentless cycle of work, sleep, and cheap instant noodles. The salty, artificial broth became the taste of my existence. I became a ghost in my own life. I lost weight. Dark circles became permanent fixtures under my eyes. I stopped talking to the few friends I had, too ashamed to tell them the full story of how I'd lost everything. How do you explain that your own brother, with a smile on his face, tricked you into homelessness? It sounded too pathetic, too unbelievable. Meanwhile, news of Oleg's life would trickle back to me through the grapevine of family acquaintances. He and Svetlana had redecorated the apartment, tearing out Grandma's beloved, if dated, floral wallpaper and replacing it with cold, minimalist gray. They threw lavish parties, the kind I sometimes saw pictures of on Svetlana's social media. Crowds of loud, laughing people clutching champagne flutes, posing in the bay window that was once my reading nook. He was a serial entrepreneur, constantly launching flashy, ill-conceived businesses with other people's money. A boutique marketing firm that folded in 6 months. An artisanal coffee subscription box that never delivered a single box. A tech startup with a vague, disruptive mission that burned through investor cash in a year. Each failure was followed by a new, grander venture, funded by a fresh round of loans. He was a master of appearances, always driving a new leased car, always wearing a designer watch. To the outside world, he was a success. But I knew the truth. He was building a house of cards on a foundation of debt and deceit. The few times we ran into each other were excruciating. Once, I was in the grocery store, carefully counting my change to see if I could afford both milk and bread, when I heard his booming laugh. He was at the deli counter, ordering imported prosciutto, while Svetlana inspected a bottle of expensive olive oil. He spotted me in my worn-out coat, clutching a packet of ramen noodles. A slow, cruel smirk spread across his face. "Olivia. Well, look at you," he said, his voice loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Still living that bohemian lifestyle, I see. Still renting." I felt my face flush with heat. My heart hammered against my ribs. I wanted the floor to swallow me whole. I just nodded, unable to speak. "See," he said, turning to Svetlana and gesturing toward me as if I were an object lesson. "This is why I had to step in. She would have been eaten alive by the upkeep on that old place.
I was smart to take the apartment.
It was the responsible thing to do." He gave me a patronizing wink and turned back to the counter, dismissing me completely. I fled the store, leaving my groceries behind. I sat on a bus stop bench in the rain, not even feeling the cold, while shame and rage washed over me in alternating waves. That night, something inside me shifted. The tears dried up. The self-pity burned away, leaving behind something hard and cold and sharp. The desire for revenge was no longer a vague, shapeless thing. It began to take form. It began to have a plan. From that day on, every penny I saved was a stone in the foundation of my new life. Every extra shift I worked was a bullet I was loading into a metaphorical magazine. I stopped buying instant noodles and started buying bulk bags of rice and lentils. I taught myself to cook cheap, nutritious meals. I stopped thinking of my situation as a temporary purgatory and started thinking of it as a training montage. I was forging myself into a weapon. I left the junior design job for a better-paying one at a larger firm. I worked harder than anyone else. I took on the projects no one wanted. I stayed late. I came in early. I taught myself new skills online: coding, project management, advanced analytics. My bosses noticed. Promotions followed. My income steadily grew. I moved out of the shoebox room and into a small but clean studio apartment. It had its own bathroom. The first time I took a shower without having to wait in line felt like the height of luxury. The first time my paycheck was large enough to put $1,000 into a savings account, I stared at the number on my screen and felt a jolt of pure, unadulterated power. Through these years, I kept tabs on Oleg. Not actively at first, but I listened. I paid attention. I learned that his latest venture, a high-risk import-export business, was struggling. I heard whispers of angry creditors and bounce checks. The flashy parties at Grandma's old apartment became less frequent. One evening, about 6 years after the betrayal, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. "Hello." I answered cautiously. "Yes, I'm trying to reach Oleg Jensen," a gruff voice said. "I'm sorry, you have the wrong number." "Is this Olivia Jensen? His sister? We have you listed as a family contact." My blood ran cold. "Who is this?" "This is a representative from Sterling Credit Solutions. We have an urgent business matter to discuss with Mr. Jensen regarding a significant outstanding debt." A slow smile spread across my face. It was the first genuine smile I'd felt in years. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice dripping with false sweetness. "I haven't spoken to my brother in years. I have no idea how to reach him. Good luck." I hung up. The collectors were circling. The house of cards was starting to sway. I started saving with a ferocity that bordered on obsession. I lived like a monk, my only indulgence being a cup of good coffee in the morning. Every dollar went into a high-yield savings account. I met with a financial planner. I invested. I learned. My little pile of savings grew into a small mountain. 7 years. 7 long, cold winters of sacrifice and discipline. 7 years of nursing a single, burning coal of hatred in my heart. By the end of that 7th year, I was no longer the naive, trusting girl who had signed her life away in a coffee shop. I was 31 years old, I had a significant amount of savings, a perfect credit score, and a plan that was as simple as it was devastating. One rainy Tuesday in October, I was scrolling through real estate listings, a habit I'd picked up over the years. And then I saw it. It felt like a bolt of lightning. A small, two-bedroom bungalow. Quaint, a little rundown, but with good bones. Its most important feature, however, was its address. 141 Chestnut Avenue. It was the house directly across the street from my grandmother's apartment. From its living room window, you had a perfect, unobstructed view of the front door and the bay window where Oleg and Svetlana now lived. My heart began to pound, a frantic drumbeat against my ribs. The last piece of the puzzle had just snapped into place. The hunt was no longer a distant dream. It was about to begin. And I knew, with every fiber of my being, that my brother had no idea what was coming for him. Part 3. The neighbor across the street. The process of buying a house is a special kind of hell. It's a mountain range of paperwork, a river of financial disclosures, and a valley of anxiety-ridden waiting. But for me, it was a holy pilgrimage. Every form I signed, every bank statement I provided, was a step closer to my goal. I was methodical, relentless. I met with the mortgage broker, a kind, middle-aged woman named Sarah, who looked at my financial history with raised eyebrows. "Miss Jensen," she said, peering over her glasses, "your savings rate is remarkable. Your credit is pristine. Frankly, you're a dream client. Most people your age are drowning in debt." "I'm very disciplined," I replied, a small, tight smile on my face. I didn't tell her my discipline was fueled by 7 years of distilled rage. I didn't tell her this mortgage wasn't just for a house. It was for a front-row seat to the implosion of my brother's life. There were moments of sheer panic. Another offer was placed on the house, and I had to counter, stretching my budget to its absolute limit. For 48 agonizing hours, I didn't sleep, convinced my entire plan was about to crumble. I paced my small studio apartment, replaying the smug look on Oleg's face in the grocery store over and over again. It was the fuel I needed. I called my realtor, offer them $5,000 more, and tell them I can close in 3 weeks. It worked. The house was mine. The day I got the keys, I didn't move any of my things in. I just drove to my new address, parked my modest but reliable car, and walked up the short path to the front door. The key felt heavy and real in my hand. It slid into the lock with a satisfying click. I stepped inside. The house was empty, smelling of dust and faint, lingering scent of the elderly couple who had lived there for 50 years. I walked through the vacant rooms, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. Finally, I reached the living room. And there it was, the window. I stood before it, my heart thudding a slow, heavy rhythm. Across the quiet, tree-lined street was 142 Chestnut Avenue. My grandmother's home. My home. I could see the bay window, the flower boxes that Svetlana had filled with garish, plastic-looking geraniums. I could see the front steps where I'd sat with Grandma on summer evenings, eating popsicles. A car pulled into the driveway over there, a slightly older, less flashy model than Oleg used to drive. He got out, his shoulders slumped. He looked tired. He looked stressed. He glanced around, his eyes scanning the street, but he didn't notice me, a shadow in the empty house across the way. He just looked diminished. It was more satisfying than I could have possibly imagined. Now for the centerpiece. My plan wasn't just about proximity. It was about psychological warfare. I didn't want to just watch his downfall. I wanted him to know I was watching. I wanted to be a constant, unavoidable presence in his life, a living monument to his deceit. The next day, I didn't call a moving company. I called a sign-making shop. "I need a banner," I told a man on the phone. "A very large one. White vinyl. Weatherproof." "Sure thing. What do you want it to say?" I took a deep breath, savoring the words I had practiced in my head for years. In big, bold, black letters, I wanted to say, "Property of Olivia Jensen. Bought without debts or deceit." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Okay. Unusual, but you're the boss. That'll be ready for pickup on Friday." I paid for it in cash. Holding the receipt felt like holding a verdict. The day of the move was orchestrated with military precision. I hired movers for the morning. They were efficient, filling the small house with my modest collection of furniture. I spent the afternoon unpacking my kitchen, my heart light with a giddy sense of anticipation. All day, I watched the house across the street. Svetlana left in her car around noon, looking angry. Oleg didn't emerge at all. The curtains in the living room remained drawn. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across Chestnut Avenue, it was time. The banner was heavy, rolled up in a thick tube. I'd already installed 2 sturdy hooks on the eave of my front porch. It was a struggle to do it myself. My arms ached, and I nearly dropped it twice. But I was determined. This was a ceremony I had to perform alone. Finally, I got it hooked on. With a deep, shuddering breath, I unfurled it. It dropped down with a loud thwump, a stark rectangle of white against the beige siding of my house. The black letters were enormous, impossible to miss. They screamed across the quiet street. Property of Olivia Jensen. Bought without debts or deceit. I stepped back onto the lawn, my hands on my hips, and looked at my work. It was perfect. It was a declaration of war disguised as a housewarming decoration. I looked across at Oleg's window. The curtains were still drawn. But I knew he would see it. I went inside, made myself a cup of tea, the way Grandma used to, 2 lumps, a whisper of milk, and sat in a folding chair by my new living room window. I waited. It didn't take long. Around 7 o'clock, a light flicked on in the living room across the street. A silhouette appeared behind the curtains. A moment later, the curtains were ripped back with a violent tug. I could just make out Oleg's figure, standing there, stock still. He was staring. I could feel the heat of his gaze from across the street. He stood there for a full minute, then another. Then the silhouette disappeared. I heard his front door slam open, the sound cracking the evening calm like a whip. Heavy, angry footsteps stomped across the asphalt. My doorbell rang, not a polite chime but a furious, frantic mashing of the button. I took a slow, deliberate sip of my tea. I stood up, smoothed down my shirt, and walked to the door. I opened it and looked at my brother. His face was a blotchy, furious red. A vein pulsed in his forehead. His eyes were wide with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "What is this?" he choked out, pointing a trembling finger at the banner. "What the hell is this, Olivia? Have you gone completely insane?" I leaned against the doorframe, affecting an air of perfect calm. I even managed a small, serene smile. "Hello, Oleg. Welcome to the neighborhood. I'm just celebrating my purchase. Do you like my sign?" "Your purchase? You can't afford this." "How did you do this?" he sputtered, his voice cracking. "I worked," I said simply. 3 jobs for a few years. Then a better job. I saved my money. It turns out, when you don't build your life on lies and credit, you can actually accumulate wealth. It's a novel concept, I know. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. The arrogant, smirking man from the grocery store was gone. In his place was a sputtering, cornered animal. "Take it down," he hissed. "Take it down right now. You're embarrassing me. You're embarrassing the family." "What family, Oleg?" I asked, my voice dropping, losing its cheerful edge and taking on the cold, hard temper of the past 7 years. "The family that stole my home and left me with nothing? The family that slammed the door in my face. I don't think that family gets a say in my decorating choices." "This is harassment," he shouted. "No," I countered, my voice dangerously quiet. "This is a statement of fact. This is my property. I bought it, and I did it honestly. Can you say the same about the house you're living in? Or, I guess I should say, the house Grandma gave to me?" He flinched as if I'd struck him. He had no response. He just stood there on my doorstep, breathing heavily, his impotent rage radiating off him in waves. Finally, he spoke, his voice a low, threatening whisper. "You'll regret this, Olivia." "No, brother," I said, my smile returning, colder and sharper than before. "You will." I closed the door gently in his face, leaving him standing on my porch under the shadow of his own shame, publicly displayed for the whole world to see. I went back to my window, my heart hammering not with fear, but with a wild, triumphant thrill. The first shot had been fired. The war had just begun. And from my new command post, I had a perfect view of the battlefield. Part 4. The slow siege and the surrender. The banner was a declaration, but the war itself was one of slow, psychological attrition. It was a siege, and my only weapon was the quiet, relentless truth. Every morning, I would make my coffee and stand at my living room window. And every morning, like clockwork, the curtains across the street would part. I would watch Oleg or Svetlana see the banner, and I would see the jolt of fresh anger and shame that went through them. Sometimes, Oleg would slam the window shut. Other times, he would just stare, defeated, before retreating into the shadows of the house. It was my morning ritual, a little shot of justice to start the day. The neighborhood, a quiet enclave of established families, noticed. Of course, they did. People would slow their cars as they drove by. Neighbors out for a walk would stop and stare, whispering to each other. I got a few curious knocks on my door. I was always polite, always friendly. Oh, the banner? I'd say with a shrug to Mrs. Gable from next door. It's just a personal reminder. A little motivation for myself about how far I've come. I let them fill in the blanks. And they did. The story of Oleg's many failed businesses and flashy lifestyle was common knowledge. My banner provided the missing context. The narrative began to shift. He was no longer the charming entrepreneur. He was the man whose sister felt the need to post a sign like that. His attempts at retaliation were petty and pathetic. He reported my banner to the Homeowners Association, which didn't exist in our old neighborhood. He called the city, claiming it was an illegal sign. They informed him that temporary, non-commercial signs on one's own property were perfectly legal. Each failure seemed to drain more color from his face. The mail became another front in our silent war. I saw the envelopes arrive. At first, they were just standard window envelopes, but soon they became more colorful, more aggressive. Bright red, urgent, and final notice stamps began to appear. I knew what they were. I started getting the calls again, too. Sterling Credit Solutions, looking for Oleg Jensen. This time, my response was different. Oh, yes, I'd say, my voice full of cheerful helpfulness. He lives right across the street from me, at 142 Chestnut, in the gray house. You can't miss it. In fact, I can see him through the window right now. Looks like he's home. There would be a stunned silence on the other end, then a quick thank you. Minutes later, a car would pull up to his house. It was delicious. The tension in their house became palpable, even from across the street. I witnessed arguments on their front lawn. Svetlana's gestures grew more frantic, Oleg's more defensive. One Saturday morning, I saw her loading suitcases into her car. They had one last, spectacular screaming match in the driveway before she got in and sped away, leaving a strip of rubber on the asphalt. She didn't come back. Oleg began to unravel. He stopped mowing the lawn. The garish geraniums in the window boxes wilted and died. He lost weight, and the expensive clothes he wore now hung off his frame, looking like a costume for a part he could no longer play. The smug confidence was gone, replaced by a haunted look. Our encounters on the street were the best part. The power dynamic had been completely inverted. He would try to avoid me, crossing the street or turning abruptly if he saw me approaching. But I would make a point of being friendly. Good morning, Oleg. I'd call out, a bright smile on my face. How are things? He would just grunt and walk faster. How are the debts, brother? I'd ask, my voice sweet as poison. Thinking of selling the place? I hear the market is pretty good right now. He'd flinch, his shoulders hunching, and hurry away without a word. The man who had humiliated me in a grocery store couldn't even meet my eyes. The final collapse came about a year after I moved in. His import-export business imploded in a spectacular fashion, leading to lawsuits from his partners. A for sale sign appeared on the lawn one day, but it was from a bank, not a realtor. Foreclosure. He had tried to mortgage the apartment to save his business, But with his mountain of existing debt, no legitimate bank would touch him. He was trapped. The house of cards hadn't just swayed, it had been leveled by a hurricane of his own making. A week after the foreclosure sign went up, on a cold, rainy evening, my doorbell rang.
It was a soft, hesitant chime this time.
I knew who it was. I opened the door. There stood Oleg, a scarecrow of a man, soaked by the rain. His hair was plastered to his forehead, his face was pale and gaunt. The arrogant bully was gone, and in his place was a broken, desperate shell. "Olivia," he whispered, his voice hoarse. He couldn't look at me, his eyes fixed on my doormat. I need your help." I said nothing. I just waited, letting him stew in his own humiliation. "The bank, they're taking everything," he choked out. "I'm going to lose it. Grandma's apartment. I have nowhere to go. Please help me. You're the only one who has any money. Your family." The word family coming from his lips was so absurd it was almost funny. I felt a surge of cold, satisfying power. This was the moment I had worked for, bled for 7 agonizing years. "Help you," I said, my voice dangerously soft. "Why on earth would I do that? The last time I helped you, you stole my home and left me for dead. Give me one good reason why I should lift a finger for you." Tears started to stream down his face, mixing with the rain. "Because I was wrong," he sobbed. "I was an arrogant fool. I was greedy, and I was cruel, and I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Olivia. I'll do anything. I'll give it back. I'll sign it back over to you. Just get me out of this.
Pay off the bank.
Please." I looked at him, this pathetic, weeping man, and I felt nothing. No pity. No sympathy. Just the quiet satisfaction of a long-overdue debt being paid. "All right," I said, my voice crisp and businesslike. "Here are my terms. You will sign a quitclaim deed, transferring ownership of 142 Chestnut Avenue to me, effective immediately. I will not give you a single penny for it. In exchange, I will pay off the lien to stop the foreclosure. You will have 48 hours to remove your personal belongings. After that, anything left inside becomes mine. Do you understand?" He looked up, a flicker of his old self flashing in his eyes. "But that leaves me with nothing." "Precisely," I said with a chilling smile. "The same place you left me 7 years ago. The only difference is I'm not going to lie to you about it. Take it or leave it. The bank will have it by Friday either way." He had no choice. He sagged in defeat, the last bit of fight draining out of him. "I'll do it," he whispered. "I'll sign." The next day, we met at a lawyer's office, my lawyer. He signed the papers without a word, his hand shaking so badly he could barely hold the pen. I watched him sign away the home he stole, the scratch of the pen on the paper the sweetest music I had ever heard. Then, I authorized the wire transfer that would pay off his debts to the bank. It was a hefty sum, but it was a price I was more than willing to pay. It was the price of my home. 2 days later, I walked across the street. The key he'd left under the mat felt foreign in my hand, but the lock turned with a familiar, welcome click. I pushed the door open. The apartment was mostly empty, save for a few pieces of ugly, modern furniture he hadn't had time to move. But underneath the sterile scent of his existence, it was still there. Faint, but unmistakable. The smell of old books, of dried lavender, of my grandmother's apple jam. I walked to the bay window and looked out. Across the street, my little bungalow stood, solid and unassuming. And on its porch, the massive white banner still hung, its black letters a stark reminder. I was finally home, and I never did take that banner down. It's still there to this day. Let it be a landmark. Let it be a warning. Every morning, when Oleg drives by on his way to whatever menial job he is now, I hear he's in logistics, he has to see it. He has to see my name, and he is to be reminded of the simple, unchangeable truth. You cannot build your happiness on the ruins of someone else's. You can't steal a home, because a home is more than just walls and a roof. It's a memory. It's a legacy. And some of us will fight to the bitter end to get it back. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever had to fight for what's rightfully yours, let me know in the comments below. And if you want to hear more stories about justice being served, cold and calculated, make sure you're subscribed. Until next time, remember, revenge is a dish best served from the house across the street.